Hello, welcome back to the Spectrasonics Omnisphere tutorial. Today we're having a look at the filter section. So we've got an initialized multi, that's what it sounds like normally. Turn the filter on, we've got a much muddier sound. So let's try to figure out why that's happening. First things first, if I press a note down and hold it, watch what happens to the wave. See, it's changing over time. That's because we have an envelope amount set. Now, for the purposes of today and the way I want to demonstrate the filter, I don't really want stuff changing over time, and that's what envelopes are all about. We're going to deal with the envelope section later, but for today, I'm going to turn it all the way down, and now we're going to get a much more static sound, and it's going to be easier to understand what's going on. Okay, so there we have our low-pass filter. What this means is that high frequencies are being thrown away. If low frequencies are being allowed to pass through, it stands to reason that high frequencies aren't, and that's exactly what's happening. We have this concept of a thing called a cutoff frequency, which is a specific frequency. At the moment it's set to, if you hover over it, 0.1 kilohertz, and we can turn that up to, let's say 1 kilohertz to start with. So that's the frequency at which frequencies above it are going to start to be discarded, and the amount by which they're discarded is specified by the decibel rate. So 12 decibels per octave, that's what it means. It means 12 decibels of volume, of amplitude, are going to be hacked off the sound for every octave we go above our cutoff at 1 kilohertz. So at 2 kilohertz, we've lost 12 dB. At 4 kilohertz, which is double 2, then we've lost another 12 dB, and so on and so on. So you're going to get a curve. Now, 12 decibels is quite a gentle curve, and this slope here is representative of that. If I increase the depth of that filter to 24 decibels, that slope is going to get steeper. This curve gets exponentially steeper. Don't forget, all of these effects are logarithmic. In addition to having a cutoff frequency, we also have this thing called resonance. Now, resonance is a function of filtering. They're actually called resonant low-pass filters in this case. And I've done a video on resonance. I'll put that somewhere. But it basically gives you a little spike at the cutoff point. So if I start increasing resonance, you're going to see a bump begin to appear in the curve. And now, with resonance being dialed in, if we pull the cutoff back, you'll get the kind of classic 70s analog filter sweep. Now, some of the filter options in this filter bank, you've got masses and masses of different presets. And some of them allow the filter to do a thing called self-oscillate. And the UVI filter is one of these. I'm going to turn the amp down because self-oscillation is a pretty nasty kind of sound if it's too loud. You're going to get a really sharp spike. That nasty high-pitched whine is the filter itself generating its own sine tones by a function of its internal circuitry. Head off to my other video where I explain all of that in some depth. Next, we have the key tracking control. And this specifies a variable, kind of basically like seesaw slope. That means that high keys on the keyboard, this is now a keyboard tracking device. The higher keys are going to be treated differently to the low keys depending on where this knob's set. Now at 50% at 12 o'clock, there's no change and the entire keyboard is treated equally. But if I increase this knob, it means now the high keys are going to be brighter and the low keys are going to be duller. So if I play a nice low C, you can hear that more and more frequencies coming into the sound because this is a low key, and so at minimum key tracking, the low keys are being accentuated, and and at maximum key tracking, the low keys are being attenuated. That logic, which is brain bending enough all on its own, can be completely flipped. See, there's a rectangle around the word key. If I click that, now the logic is inverted, which is basically too much for my feeble brain. So now at this level, the low keys are going to be attenuated. So now you're going to get completely the opposite effect. Why anybody would want to do this to themselves, it's just like masochism. And high keys, dull, bright. Let's not press that button, hey. Then we've got the envelope. I'll actually deal with that control when we deal with the envelope page, so we'll skip that for today. We've got an overall gain control, particularly when you're dealing with resonance. As you increase resonance, the amount of signal allowed out of the filter bank is very often more than to put in. And so you can use the gain slider to compensate for those kinds of effects. Again, if you're pulling stuff away, if you're throwing frequencies away with a fairly brutal cutoff, you can potentially increase the gain to get yourself to a net zero volume. Okay, so you might think, nice and simple, I've seen filters like that before, what's the big fuss? Well, all of that is a bit of a skin on top of the real filter engine, which we get when we enter the filter zoom. Because what's actually going on is we have two completely independent filter systems, and they work in harmony. So if I select, for instance, a 36 dB low pass filter, what's actually going on under the hood is that is two different low pass filters, one at a 24 dB and one at 12 dB, feeding into each other for a total attenuation of 36 decibels per octave. So this is your real view of what the filter system's actually doing. Now, these two independent filters are genuinely completely separate, and they can be combined in two different ways. So in series, it means the output from filter 1 is going into filter 2. The best way to demonstrate this is to set one of them to a low pass filter. I'm actually going to turn the second one off, but what we will be doing eventually is having the second filter be high pass instead, which means we're throwing low frequencies away and letting the high stuff through. So just for now, one filter all on its own. Another thing to note when we head into the zoom page is that these controls here, cutoff is at like 9 o'clock, resonance at 12, are these effects down below. So they are a 1-for-1 equivalent. So I'm going to increase the cutoff all the way to maximum so that we've got the full wave. Nice bright wave. And now I can pull this down from the master cutoff, or I can apply a cutoff offset to that individual filter. So this cutoff is the net effect of both filters. We're only currently using one, but we also have independent modulation of each one of the filters as well. So now there's our low pass filter. We've thrown high frequencies away. Turn that off, bring the other filter in, and now we have a high pass filter which is throwing low stuff away. There you can see the low frequencies coming back in, and there they are being thrown away. Make it a 24 dB high pass filter. The slope is steeper. So what happens when we combine those two things together? We end up with what's called a band pass filter, which means the stuff in the middle is getting through, the low pass filter is throwing high frequencies away, and the high pass filter is throwing low frequencies away. So we get a kind of a mountain shape in the middle. And now by just setting the cutoff offset for the high pass filter, I get to control its individual effect on the sound. So that's in series, the output from the low pass filter feeding into the high pass filter and then being further filtered or attenuated. Let's switch to parallel mode instead. Let's see what different kind of effect we get on the wave when we send the signal into both of these filters simultaneously but not mixed together and then onto the outside world. We get a much less dramatic effect because now the low pass filter is letting a ton of stuff through. All of the low pass frequencies are getting through completely unaffected and getting to the outside world. The high pass filter is letting a load of the high stuff through and it's getting to the outside world unaffected. Both of those streams get mixed together, and so now we get an unaffected signal on both sides, and then only where the two filters are actually combined do we have any effect in the middle. So series and parallel processing when dealing with multiple filters is really important. Just bear in mind the dramatic effect on the sound that these buttons have. Really very different effects. Now this is a feature of the UI that I really dislike. The mix control only has anything to do in parallel mode, but here we are in series and it still looks like this control is active. It really should be grayed out and unusable because it doesn't do anything. It's completely dead in series mode. In parallel mode, it determines the relative mix of each of the two filters. So over on the left hand side, we've got our low pass filter, and on the right hand side, our high pass filter. Mix those two together for the kind of the gentler version of those two filters working in combination with each other. Here's our master gain control, which is a mirror of this setting over here. Set it to maximum, that's set to maximum, and bring it back down again. Then we've got pre and post. I will confess to you, it's very rare that you actually hear any dramatic difference by pressing these buttons. It really depends on the sound source, but basically it determines whether or not the gain slider is applied before the signal goes into the filters or after the signal comes out of the filters. So I'm not going to concentrate on it much because I don't think it's a particularly dramatic effect on the synth. So that's all the global stuff. Then we've got independent offsets. You see, all of these controls are called offset because these are applying a per filter variance on the master control. So the offset is dependent on how much this cutoff value down here is set. I'm just going to turn the high pass filter off again to, focus in on the LPF again. You're getting the same overall effect by moving these two knobs at the same time. It just means that you can have a master cutoff that's doing a particular job, maybe dealing with this particular resonant frequency, and then each of the cutoff offsets is applying your own kind of per filter variant to those two settings. And you can see the relative motion of the two resonant peaks on those two filters. Finally, we need to have a look at the various variant options. There's a master variant and then offsets for each of the filters. This depends on what kind of filter you're dealing with. For the majority of the time, if you just go back to a single low pass filter again, what it's actually going to do is affect the stereo field. So there's our standard low pass filter. If I pull variance all the way down to the left hand side, you get a very different sound. Then pan the whole synth. That's what the left hand side sounds like, and that's what the right hand side sounds like, really dull. So it's actually applying a cutoff variant across the stereo image. And that's what most of the filter settings deal with. But here you can see if you're dealing with a power filter, variant controls the width of the cutoff. It's like a bandpass kind of effect. And in the resonant types, it controls the tone of the filters. It really depends what type of filter you're dealing with, but it's all about the kind of the different effects in the stereo field. So you can see here we've got 4 different peaks, 2 resonant peaks from the primary filters, but then they're being split across the stereo field as well. You can see them crossing over each other as well. So a really massively flexible filter unit, having 2 filters per layer. Don't forget this is per layer. So we've got stereo filter system for each one of these 4 sounds within the patch for a total of 8 different filter banks. Really kind of monstrous stuff. That's the filter section dealt with. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please subscribe, hit notifications. Catch me for the next one. Thanks a lot.